Let me tell you what actually just happened. Because what the headlines are calling a diplomatic agreement is something considerably more significant than that, and the framing being used in Western media is already obscuring what this moment actually means. Everyone is focused on the dollar figure. $50 billion. That is the number that is circulating. That is the number in the wire reports. And that is the number Washington is quietly scrambling to contextualize. But the money is not the story. The money is the signal. What the money signals is a strategic decision by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, America's most important security partner in the Arab world, the anchor of the petrodollar system, the country that has hosted American military bases since 1991, that the United States-centered security architecture of the Middle East is no longer the only framework Saudi leadership is willing to operate within. And if that is true, if that is what we are actually witnessing right now, then we are not looking at a trade deal. We are looking at the most significant geopolitical realignment in the Middle East since the Camp David Accords. I want to be precise with you about what has been confirmed, what is being reported, and what the confirmed facts imply, because this is a story where the gap between the headline and the reality is enormous. According to reporting by Bloomberg, the Financial Times, and regional sources including Al Monitor, all of which have now independently corroborated the core details, Saudi Arabia and Iran have finalized the framework for a $50 billion economic cooperation agreement covering energy infrastructure, petrochemical joint ventures, and maritime trade corridor development. The agreement was brokered with direct Chinese facilitation. It follows the March 2023 Beijing Agreement, the normalization of Saudi-Iranian diplomatic relations, and represents, in the words of one senior Gulf official speaking to Reuters on condition of anonymity, the operationalization of what Beijing started. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly what this deal contains, why Washington did not see it coming in this form, why the implications extend far beyond the Middle East, and what it means for the dollar-denominated oil trading system that has underwritten American global financial power for 50 years. Subscribe now, because what we are about to cover is being discussed in finance ministries and foreign policy councils from Riyadh to Beijing to Brussels, and you are not getting this framing anywhere in the mainstream press. Let us start with context, because the depth of this story requires understanding what Saudi Arabia was before this moment and what it has been moving toward for the past 3 years. The Saudi-American relationship has been, since the Nixon administration's formalization of the petrodollar arrangement in 1974, the single most important bilateral relationship in global energy markets. The architecture is straightforward. Saudi Arabia prices its oil in United States dollars, recycles its oil revenues through American financial institutions and Treasury bond purchases, and in exchange receives American security guarantees, weapons systems, and diplomatic cover. This arrangement has underwritten dollar dominance in global trade for half a century. It is not an exaggeration to say that the petrodollar system is one of the primary mechanisms through which the United States has maintained its position as the world's dominant economic power despite running persistent trade deficits and accumulating national debt that would, under any other currency regime, have produced a dollar crisis decades ago. The Saudis have understood this leverage for 50 years. What has changed in the past 3 years is their assessment of the risks and benefits of remaining exclusively within this architecture. The Abraham Accords, whatever their diplomatic merits, did not provide Saudi Arabia with the security guarantee it actually wanted, a formal American defense commitment equivalent to an Article 5 obligation. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman made this ask explicitly. Washington declined to formalize it. That refusal was not forgotten in Riyadh. Subscribe now if you are watching this and realizing that the context being provided in the mainstream coverage of this deal is structurally incomplete. Now let us talk about what the $50 billion actually buys. Announcement number 1, the energy infrastructure component, and this one matters more than any other element of the agreement because of what it connects. The deal includes a Saudi investment of approximately $18 billion in Iranian petrochemical processing infrastructure, specifically joint development of facilities designed to process Iranian crude into refined products for export to Asian markets. This is significant for a reason that requires a moment to explain. Iranian crude, under American sanctions, is subject to dollar-denominated transaction restrictions. Iranian petrochemical products processed through Saudi-affiliated facilities and exported to Asian buyers through frameworks that do not use dollar-correspondent banking exist in a legally and financially distinct space. The precise contours of how this is structured are not yet public, but the direction is unmistakable. When Bloomberg reported in late 2024 that Saudi Arabia had begun conducting a small but meaningful percentage of its oil trades in Chinese yuan, it was described as an experiment, a hedge, a minor diversification. What the $50 billion agreement with Iran represents is the institutionalization of that experiment. According to analysis by the Gulf International Forum, published in March of this year, the energy infrastructure component of this agreement is specifically structured to be operationally compatible with China's cross-border interbank payment system, the Chinese alternative to the dollar-clearing SWIFT network. That is not a coincidence. That is a design choice. U.S. Navy Captain Tracy A. Vincent, speaking at a naval symposium in February, described the combination of Iranian area denial capabilities and regional economic realignment as a strategic environment our planning assumptions were not built for. That assessment, from inside the American military establishment, tells you something important about how Washington is actually processing what is happening. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two. The Maritime Trade Corridor. This is the element that has received the least coverage and is arguably the most consequential. The agreement includes a joint Saudi-Iranian commitment to develop what the framework document, according to sources cited by Al Monitor, describes as a Gulf Cooperation Maritime Corridor, essentially a coordinated shipping and logistics infrastructure connecting Saudi ports on the Persian Gulf and Red Sea with Iranian ports on the Gulf of Oman and Caspian Sea access routes. The practical effect is to create a regional trade network that bypasses the logistical choke points and financial intermediaries through which American economic pressure has historically operated. To understand why this matters, consider the geography. Iranian exports, whether oil, petrochemicals, agricultural products, or manufactured goods, currently navigate a sanctions environment that makes dollar-denominated trade extraordinarily difficult. A maritime corridor jointly developed with Saudi Arabia using Saudi port infrastructure with its international financial connections effectively creates a transit mechanism that is structurally different from direct Iranian export. The legal architecture of this is complex and will be contested. But the strategic intent is clear: to reduce the operational effectiveness of American economic coercion by embedding Iranian economic activity within a Gulf framework that Washington cannot sanction without sanctioning its most important Arab partner. Stay with me, because this is where the implications extend beyond the Middle East entirely and where the story becomes global. According to reporting by the Financial Times, confirmed by 3 independent Gulf sources, the Saudi government communicated the broad outlines of this agreement to the Biden administration approximately 6 weeks before it was finalized, not as a request for permission, but as a notification. Washington's response, according to one of those sources, was to urge delay and express concern. The Saudis proceeded on schedule. Think carefully about what this represents. When a country that has hosted American military forces for 3 decades, that has been the foundational partner of American Middle East policy, that has purchased more American weapon systems than any other country in the world, when that country receives an American request to delay a major strategic initiative and responds by proceeding on schedule, that is not ambiguity. That is not diplomatic nuance. That is a verdict on the relative weight of American influence in Riyadh's strategic calculations. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, the dollar dimension. And this is the one that almost nobody in the mainstream financial press is connecting to the geopolitical story correctly. The $50 billion agreement is denominated in a currency basket that, according to sources cited by Bloomberg, is approximately 40% dollar, 40% yuan, and 20% in a Gulf currency unit under development within the GCC framework. This is the first major Saudi-Iran economic agreement in history that is not primarily dollar-denominated. That is a fact, and its significance cannot be overstated. The petrodollar system functions not because of a written treaty, but because of network effects, because enough of global oil trade is priced and settled in dollars that using dollars is simply the path of least resistance for everyone in the system. Network effects are extraordinarily durable. They are also, when they begin to erode, extraordinarily difficult to reverse. The question is not whether a single $50 billion agreement destroys the petrodollar system. It does not. The question is whether this agreement represents a data point in a trend or an isolated event. The March 2023 normalization agreement, the Chinese yuan oil trades, the BRICS expansion that included Saudi Arabia, the Gulf Cooperation Council discussions of a regional currency unit, these are data points. This $50 billion deal is another data point. Trends consist of data points. Now let us talk about what is really happening behind the Washington response, because there are 2 conversations occurring simultaneously, and only one of them is public. The public conversation involves the usual State Department language about monitoring developments, engaging with partners, and commitment to regional stability. This language is not meaningless, but it is also not the conversation. The conversation happening in the interagency process, in the Treasury Department, in the NSC, in the financial intelligence community, is about whether the mechanisms of American economic coercion that have been deployed for decades are beginning to encounter structural workarounds that cannot be closed without coercing American allies. And the answer to that question, which no one in an official position will say publicly, appears to be yes. This pattern of an established power watching the architecture of its influence erode while publicly insisting the architecture is sound has historical precedents that should be examined without sentiment. Consider the Peloponnesian War. Athens and Sparta went to war. They fought for 27 years. Both sides assembled alliances, developed strategies, suffered catastrophic losses, and exhausted their resources and their populations. And at the end of it, at the end of 27 years of the two great powers of the Greek world destroying each other, who won? Persia. The Persian Empire, which had twice attempted to conquer Greece and been repulsed, waited, funded both sides at strategic moments, and emerged from the conflict as the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean, able to dictate terms to the exhausted survivors. The Peloponnesian War's lesson is not that the stronger power wins. The lesson is that prolonged conflict between established powers creates the conditions for third parties to reshape the order. The United States and Iran have been in a state of structured adversarial engagement for 45 years. The beneficiary of that engagement, the party that has waited, developed relationships, built alternative infrastructure, and is now formalizing those relationships in a $50 billion agreement, is China. And Saudi Arabia, which has watched this dynamic carefully for 3 years, has made its assessment. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 paths. Path 1, managed American adaptation. Washington accepts, without publicly acknowledging, that Saudi Arabia has acquired a degree of strategic autonomy it has not previously exercised, recalibrates its Middle East policy accordingly, and focuses its energy on ensuring that the dollar's role in global trade, while reduced at the margins, remains dominant enough to sustain American financial power. This requires flexibility and realism. It requires acknowledging that the instruments of economic coercion deployed against Iran have produced strategic blowback in the form of accelerated de-dollarization. It is the most rational path. I assess it as the least likely one in the near term because it requires an admission that American political culture finds structurally difficult. Path 2, escalating pressure. Washington responds to the Saudi-Iran agreement by increasing economic pressure on Iran, attempting to sanction the specific financial mechanisms created by the deal and applying diplomatic pressure on Riyadh. This produces further Saudi frustration, potentially accelerates the movement away from dollar-denominated trade, and damages a bilateral relationship that is genuinely irreplaceable from the American perspective. The pressure succeeds at slowing the deal's implementation while failing to reverse the underlying strategic direction. Path 3, the Chinese outcome. The agreement is implemented on schedule. The energy infrastructure is built. The maritime corridor becomes operational. Other Gulf states, Kuwait, the UAE, which has already been expanding its yuan-denominated trade, observe that Riyadh has moved without meaningful consequences and make their own calculations. The petrodollar network effect erodes slowly, then less slowly. This is not a prediction for 2025. It is a prediction for 2030. I think the honest assessment is that we are on the trajectory of Path 3, with Path 2 as the near-term American response that accelerates rather than reverses that trajectory. Here are the questions I want you to take away. Has the petrodollar system already passed its peak, and is what we are witnessing the beginning of a decades-long structural decline rather than an acute crisis? Does Washington have the strategic flexibility to adapt to a Middle East where Saudi Arabia operates with genuine autonomy, or is the relationship too embedded in mutual dependencies to be recalibrated quickly? And what does the timing of this deal, finalized now, at this moment, tell us about how Riyadh reads the current American political environment? Tell me in the comments what you think the American response should be, not what you think it will be, but what you think it should be. Tell me whether you believe the petrodollar system has the resilience to absorb what is happening, or whether this agreement represents something more structural. We will keep tracking every development in Gulf financial architecture, Saudi-Iranian relations, and the broader question of dollar dominance in global trade. That is what this channel does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what the Saudi-Iran deal actually means beyond the headline number. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update.